So welcome to the Environmental Stewardship Initiative's Community Involvement and Environmental Justice webinar on March 7th, 2024. So today's agenda, we are going to talk through the overview and purpose of what we're doing here today. Then I am going to pass it over to Maya Hoon, who is the DEQ Title VI and Environmental Justice Coordinator. She will be giving an overview of environmental justice and some of the definitions we are using today. Then I'm going to pass it off to one of the ESI coaches, Miles Dillard, who will be discussing an overview of some of the steward member EJ reviews that we have conducted. Then he will be passing it back to me, and I will be sharing information about the new community involvement guidance document that I sent out earlier this week, and I am one of the ESI managers. Then we'll be passing it back to Maya, and she will be talking about some of the outreach best practices that can be found in the DEQ Public Participation Plan, as well as the Environmental Justice Business Toolkit, and a little bit about how to use some of the tools, I believe. And then we're going to open it up for questions and discussion. And so hopefully people will have some comments or questions, because we want to leave some time for that at the end. And this is a webinar, and so when that comes time, I'll talk through how you guys can raise your hand if you're on the phone. I actually can't see if anyone's even on the phone at this point, but we'll talk through logistics for how to raise your hand and things like that once we get to that point. All right, so purpose, why are we here? So of course, over the past several years, environmental justice and community involvement and relationships with the local community around industrial facilities has definitely become a bigger topic of conversation. This past year in 2022, community involvement was actually the first time that we have reported on having goals from members about improving their community involvement or doing more community involvement activities. And we wanted to highlight that this is not going anywhere and probably becoming more of a thing that people are going to be interested in. Now, we do have, of course, our 3 levels of membership. The steward level is our highest level, and the steward requirement is the only level that has anything that is required for community involvement, is to have an interactive process for communicating with the local community about environmental program activities and progress towards performance goals. So this is optional. Community involvement is optional for anyone other than stewards, but of course, ESI is happy to be a resource for the rising steward and the partner levels as well, and we encourage all levels to go about doing community involvement. The other kind of big reason we're here is ESI operates under the EPA Pollution Prevention Grant, and in 2022, the grant included a commitment to include environmental justice considerations, which we have begun by running an analysis of members that are within 1 mile of a DEQ defined potentially underserved community, as well as conducting these preliminary environmental justice reviews for our stewards. Of course, since they're the ones with that level of outreach. Miles will talk about those later again. And if you're not a steward and you're interested in that, you can certainly request that. So here's our initial analysis map that show the ESI members that are near potentially underserved communities that we did back in February. So 41% of our ESI members across all levels are within a DEQ identified potentially underserved community. So just to kind of set the stage a little bit, and then I am actually done. So I'm going to pass it over to Maya to talk about environmental justice.
All right, thank you, Renee. So what is environmental justice? Some of us here may already know it, so this may be a good refresher, but some of us here may not be as familiar with it, so hopefully we'll all learn a little bit of something or just get that refresher like I mentioned before. But according to the EPA, environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Next slide, please. North Carolina, specifically Warren County, is considered the birthplace of the modern environmental justice movement. And to really understand how this movement started gaining traction, in 1978, a trucking company began illegally dumping liquid contaminated with PCBs, which is a toxic persistent chemical found in TVs and electrical equipment. And this liquid contaminated with PCBs was dumped along 240 miles of roads throughout rural North Carolina. And so in that cleanup process, the state constructed a landfill to bury the contaminated soil, but that landfill was sited in Afton, which is a predominantly Black community. So there was a lot of concern about PCB waste contaminating the drinking water wells in that community. So in 1982, community civil rights activists, the NAACP, the United Church of Christ, they banded together to protest the landfill. And while there was a lot of national attention on these protests, they were unsuccessful in stopping the disposal of contaminated soil in that landfill. But in the same year, the United Church of Christ issued a landmark report, which was called the Toxic Wastes and Race Report on the Racial and Socioeconomic Characteristics of Communities with Hazardous Waste Sites. Next slide, please. And that report found that race was the largest predictor of proximity to toxic waste such as PCBs in the United States. And so to summarize that, the report found for the first time that one, communities with the greatest number of commercial hazardous waste facilities had the highest composition of non-white residents. And then two, in communities with two or more facilities or one of the nation's 5 largest landfills, such as the PCB landfill in Warren County, the average minority percentage of the population was more than 3 times that of communities without facilities. Next slide, please. So at NCDEQ, oh, you can probably press space a bit, yes. At NCDEQ, it's our mission to provide science-based environmental stewardship for the health and prosperity of all North Carolinians. In alignment with how EPA upholds environmental justice, NCDEQ is committed to ensuring the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, again, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, policies, and other department activities. Next slide, please. Because fair treatment and meaningful involvement is what fosters those good relationships between businesses and communities, DEQ created the EJ Business Toolkit as a guide to help businesses conduct public engagement with consideration of environmental and community impacts, and to understand different ways to engage with local communities early and often throughout the site selection and environmental permitting processes. And you can advance to the next slide.
So in this slide, we'll talk about some of the ESI member EJ reviews that we did for all of our stewards. So they were conducted for all stewards due to the requirement of community involvement, and we just wanted to help them to be able to tailor their outreach efforts best. Each EJ review is about 5 pages long, and any member can request to have one done. You just have to reach out to any one of your coaches. For the EJ reviews, we use the data sources from EPA's EJ screen, NCDQ's community mapping system, which is that screenshot to the right, and Google Maps. Within each review, we use the 1 mile buffer, which is represented by that red circle you see. And within this 1 mile buffer, we had race and ethnicity, demographics, limited English proficiency, household incomes, high school education attainment, NCDQ issue permits, and known environmental incidents, which are those different colored dots you see on the screenshot, sensitive receptors, and the presence of any potential underserved or disadvantaged community based on state and federal definitions, and that's what the purple area is known for in this screenshot. Next slide.
So,
Yeah.
oh, so on top, so to help build off of this, so thanks Maya for giving a little bit more background, and then Miles went over what is included in the steward EJ reviews. Then for anyone to use, we have also created this guidance document for community involvement. It consolidates activities that we have had reported to us through the years for annual reports into 9 categories. So there's fewer categories than had been done on the annual report side in the past, but it also helps identify potential partners within those and highlights activities and examples of those community involvement activities to try and help provide more examples and maybe spark some new ideas for companies that have not done something yet from one of the other ones. And then it also includes the environmental justice and public participation and outreach resources, such as the DEQ EJ Business Toolkit, as well as the public participation plan, and the language access plan is also on the public participation plan website. So here are the 9 categories that are included in the guidance document. So we have engaging and communicating environmental activities and programs, providing tours and open houses, providing habitat restoration, cleanup, or other nature-based programs, sponsoring environmental programs or grants, working with local schools or colleges, working with emergency organizations and professionals, hosting employee environmental events, conducting non-environmentally focused activities, and other ideas, because we don't have all the ideas and we hope that people keep coming up with new ideas. So these will be the categories that you guys will be seeing this coming year on the annual report. So you can kind of start thinking about that, because that will be coming out hopefully in the next week or two to provide you guys to start filling that out. Which will also be in a new platform, but we won't talk about that today. We're just trying to do a few changes. So here is the first one, just as an example. Engaging community members is the best way to conduct meaningful involvement, to really get to know and interact with the surrounding community members, and educating them on your activities and seeking their input. And then, so each of these will have like a little bit of overview like this, and then at the bottom you'll see some potential partners, and the examples are community-based organizations, local non-governmental organizations or nonprofits, neighbors, local government representatives. And so this is something that we are really seeking feedback on. This is our first version of this document. And so if you guys have partners that you work with that you don't see listed on one of the activities that we have an example of, we want your input. We want to hear what you guys have to say and help us make this better and a better resource for other members as they're trying to think about what activities that they can do.
So Miles went over the different components that are involved with a EJ review. And so I'm going to talk a bit more about how DEQ's EJ team kind of uses the community mapping system and EJ screen demographics and data to inform our outreach and help us strategize with that outreach. The DEQ mapping system is helpful to get that overview of, again, the potentially underserved communities and also state and federal tribal boundaries in the area. And in the next several slides, we'll see different factors and situations to review. And you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So if your prospective project has a 1 mile radius within a potentially underserved community, it may be good to start maintaining a spreadsheet with contact information for known community leaders in that area and also relevant community organizations. And sometimes you may want to start with communication with the community organizations, and from there you would learn more about who those local community leaders are. And creating one-page fact sheets about your project, facility, or event, that would also be very helpful to allow people from all levels of education to understand your facility's activities, your business's activities, and would help with transparency to further build trust in the community. Next slide, please. Sorry, I forgot there are animations included in this. I think if you want to press space again, it might highlight things. Yes, thank you. You might want to go back one. Sorry for the confusing nature of that. If your business or event is within a 1 mile radius of a tribal organization boundary, it would be good to share information with the tribal organization that's in that area or the urban Indian organization that's serving that county. We also recommend you work to build a relationship with tribal leaders as you would with local officials. And I'm going to paste in the chat, I can, yes. I'm going to paste in the chat a map from the Department of Administration. This is the NC Tribal and Urban Communities map that the EJ team uses. We refer to that to get an idea of which tribal organizations are in which counties and which urban Indian organizations are present in which counties. And for DEQ's enhanced public outreach for permit applications, DEQ staff would email the relevant tribal community sharing permit and facility information, one-page fact sheets, and we would also request any feedback on recommendations for further outreach to the local tribal communities. Next slide, please. And I think you can press space once, no, 3 times. Yeah, thank you. As I mentioned before, NCDEQ also uses EPA's EJ screen to analyze that 1 mile radius of a location, in which we would draw an area of the property boundaries and then put that 1 mile buffer, and then we would generate an EJ screen community report. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the EJ Screen community report for a random area in Raleigh, but you can see that you can get some helpful information that would aid you when forming outreach strategies, such as percentages for those who are low income, people of color, the population of people whose highest level of education is less than a high school diploma, households with limited English speaking proficiency, and the breakdown of those language groups with limited English on the right, the unemployed population, and the population of people living with disabilities. Next slide, please. So when there's an area with a higher percentage of those with less than a high school education, or a considerable percentage of that, our team recommends divisions to create one-page fact sheets with concise, easily digestible information with as minimal jargon and technical terms as possible for efficient communication to all audiences of all levels. Next slide. For those areas with at least 5% of limited English speaking households, we would refer to the limited English speaking breakdown. And so based on the language, the higher languages that are present, or just the language percentages, We would provide translated outreach materials in those languages and also open opportunities for requesting interpretation services in that language. And so if you have a considerable percentage of those who speak Asian Pacific Island languages, it would be good to consider these following language options that I'm going to paste in the chat. So Asian Pacific Island languages. Hopefully that comes out looking normal in the chat. But this list is based on what languages are covered in this category, but also based on the language categories that are more prevalent in North Carolina. For the other Indo-European languages, I'm going to paste this again. We have these. And then for speak other languages, we're still kind of trying to figure out the breakdown of what exactly those languages are. It's unfortunately not super clear in the US Census Bureau data, but if you want to get more exact data on the languages with limited English speaking proficiency in a community, it would be good to refer to the US Census Bureau's data on languages spoken at home. And here is a link to that table. So for DEQ's outreach in, say, areas with higher Spanish-speaking populations with limited English proficiency, the team shares event information through local Spanish radio stations, in addition to providing those translated materials as well. And next slide, please. If you see a larger population of people living with disabilities, it may be good to make sure your event or your meeting spaces have the appropriate accommodations, such as ramps and disability accessible restrooms, and ensuring that there is proper audio equipment so that everyone can hear speakers. Next slide, please. And in the last page of the EJ Screen report, there is a section that informs you on the broadband internet access in a community or within that 1 mile radius that's analyzed. And a state or US percentile at or above 50th percentile could be considered as an area with less broadband internet access. If it were 75th percentile or above, they have even less access to internet. So in this case, you could consider posting signs with event information along the roadside or posting flyers to community accessible boards. And areas with such community accessible boards could be libraries, community college boards, and town halls. A possible outreach strategy could also be sharing information through local radio or news stations. Next slide, please. The EJ team also takes a look at surrounding sensitive receptors, which would be areas where people may be more at risk of negative effects from exposure to toxic chemicals, pesticides, and other pollutants. So, for example, that could be people living with existing disabilities or health conditions, those who are 65 or older as well, since more of these populations are immunocompromised, and then those who are 5 or younger, since these are important developmental stages in a human's life. So locations for sensitive receptors could be schools, places of worship, hospitals, prisons, and subsidized housing. And if you could click the slide once more, Renee. Yes. In EJ Screen, if you click on an icon for a sensitive receptor, you can actually pull up the name of the location. And for some locations, they'll have addresses, but at the very least, if they don't have an address, you can just put in the name of the place and you can find the mailing address on Google. Next slide, please. And then from here, when when we have that information for the sensitive receptors, we can add these places and available contact information to the community contact spreadsheet to ensure these groups can also receive relevant information and updates for your project or event. And that wraps up the outreach examples. So I'll transition back to Renee.
Thanks, Maya. So we do have our contact information here for anyone who doesn't have it, and we can put Maya's in the chat as well. I think everybody here is a member, so you should have my contact information. But I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so I can look at the chat and the attendees and see if anybody is raising their hand, because we are happy to open this up for a broader discussion for anybody who has comments or questions on what we've just gone over. I know that was a lot of information. So we will just pause for a second and give everyone a moment. Okay, so it doesn't look like we have any questions from the attendees that are on the line at this point. So you guys are welcome to, if you come up with any
Renee,
questions. Oh,
text in the chat.
Oh, did you see one in the chat?
Yes, it's
Okay.
Les Lamar asked, you went over some of the strategies for outreach, but in your opinion, what has been the most successful approach? That question, so it really is a case by case situation because all communities are different. So I will say that one-page fact sheets have been pretty well appreciated so that the information is just quick, concise, people can understand, people are on the same page, and you can have discussions more easily through that. Does that answer your question? I apologize. Okay, wonderful.
Sorry, I missed that when I was looking in the chat, but I must have scrolled up too far and I saw all of the helpful information Maya had posted. Do we have any other questions from anybody about this information? Okay, so I know that what the plan is for the stewards and the reviews that we've done for the stewards, we are going to be having your coach will be sending that out to you in the next couple days so that you will be able to review that information. And then if you have any specific questions for what you have on your EJ review, as far as what it means, what might you be able to, what might you do to have the best outreach for your facility, whatever you might want to talk about, we'll be happy to talk through that with you if you would like. So I think with that, maybe we can go ahead and I'm going to stop the recording.